Ron is piloting Shirei this game, and he opens with 4 Swamps, a Death Greeter, a Bone Shredder, and a Yarok's Fen Lurker. Jordan is piloting Niv-Mizzet Reborn, and he opens with a Command Tower, a Watery Grave, Growth Spiral, Deathrite, Felwar Stone, Root Coil Creeper, and Orcus, Prince of Undead. Ryan is piloting Sliver Overlord, and he opens with 2 Forest, 2 Plains, an Arcane Sanctum, a Distant Melody, and Chromatic Lantern. And Nash is piloting his Mangara deck. His opening hand consisted of Prismatic Lens, Liquid Metal Torque, Elspeth, Sun's Champion, Blind Obedience, a Scavenging Grounds, a Plains, and a Flooded Strands. Ron starts things off with a Swamp, followed by his Death Greeter. Jordan opens with a Command Tower, and then casts a Deathrite Shaman. Ryan puts an Arcane Sanctum into play tapped. Nash's first turn consists of him playing a Flooded Strand and passing. Ron then plays another Swamp and casts a Yarok Fen Lurker, causing all 3 players to exile. Jordan exiles a Swamp, Ryan exiles a Plains, and Nash exiles an Elspeth, Sun's Champion. Jordan shocks in a Watery Grave and taps out in order to cast his Felwar Stone. Ryan plays a tapped Seaside Citadel and passes. On EOT, Nash cracks his Flooded Strand, getting a Plains. Nash plays a Plains and casts Weathered Wayfarer. Ron plays a Swamp. He then casts Night's Whisper, paying 2 life to draw 2 cards. Jordan plays a Scalding Tarn. Jordan shocks in his Stomping Grounds. Jordan taps Deathrite for a mana, exiling Nash's Fetchland out of his graveyard. He then taps his other 4 mana producers for Wooburg and casts his Niv-Mizzet. Off of the Niv-Mizzet trigger, Jordan hits an Assassin's Trophy, a Dovin's Veto, and Domri. Ryan plays a Forest. He then taps out in order to play a Darksteel Ingot. On Nash's upkeep, before drawing, he activates his Weathered Wayfarer, getting Nykthos Shrine to Nyx into his hand. Nash then plays Nykthos as his land for turn. He taps out to play Liquid Metal Torque. Ron plays a Swamp. Ron taps out and casts a Mindless Automaton, entering with 2 +1/1 counters. Jordan plays an Island as his land. Jordan casts Domri, Anarchist of Bolas. He also plays a Root Coil Creeper. Jordan then moves to combat, declaring attacks on Ron with his commander. Ron, not having any flyers, takes 7 commander damage. Ryan plays a Swamp. Ryan taps out in order to cast Sliver Overlord. On Nash's upkeep before his draw, he activates Weathered Wayfarer, getting his Core Haven to hand. Nash plays a Plains. He casts a Prismatic Lens. Ron plays Cabal Coffers. He plays Shirei from his command zone. He removes 2 +1/1 counters from Mindless Automaton in order to draw a card. On EOT, Shirei triggers, trying to bring back the Mindless Automaton, but Jordan responds by activating Deathrite Shaman and exiling it from the graveyard. Jordan plays his Sanctum of Eternity. Jordan casts Growth Spiral, drawing a card and playing a forest from hand. Jordan downticks Domri, causing Niv-Mizzet to fight with Sliver Overlord. Jordan then taps out, exiling his Scalding Tarn using his Deathrite Shaman to get the 7th mana he needs to cast Niv-Mizzet from the command zone. Off the ETB trigger, Jordan hits Mirari's Wake, Dire Strain Rampage, Reconstruct History, Prismari Command, and Simic Command. On end of turn, Jordan discards Mirari's Wake and Dovin Veto. Ryan plays a Plains. He casts a Chromatic Lantern. He casts Hearth Sliver and a Hibernation Sliver. On EOT, Nash flashes in Aven Mind Sensor. Nash plays a Scavenging Ground as his land for turn. Nash casts his Luminarch's Ascension and plays his Mangara. Ron plays Meathook Massacre X3, and Ryan responds by paying 4 life to bounce both his slivers back to hand. Ron casts Sky Scanner and draws a card off the ETB. Jordan declares attacks with Niv-Mizzet at Nash, dealing 7 commander damage to him. Jordan plays a Prismari command and picks the modes deal 2 damage targeting Skyscanner and draw 2 discard targeting himself. He discards Orcus and Dire Strain Rampage. Ryan plays a mountain and recasts his Hearth Sliver and Hibernation Sliver. Nash plays Emeria the Sky Ruin as his land for turn. Nash then plays a Deafening Silence, followed up by a Blind Obedience. Ron attempts to cast a Grave Pact, but Jordan responds with his Ionize, countering it, dealing 2 to Ron. Ron casts Zulaport Cutthroat and Soldevi Adnate. Jordan declares attacks with Niv-Mizzet at Ryan, dealing 7 commander damage to him. He then downticks Domri to make Niv-Mizzet fight with Zulaport Cutthroat. Jordan plays Scarab God. Ryan plays a forest as his land for turn. Ryan then recasts his Sliver Overlord. On EOT, Jordan Assassin Trophies, targeting Nash's Luminarch Ascension. Nash plays a Plains as his land for turn. Nash casts a Council's Judgment. Nash and Ryan vote for Niv-Mizzet. Jordan and Ron vote for Scarab God. Thus, both Niv-Mizzet and Scarab God are exiled by the Council's Judgment. Nash then casts Dranith Magistrate. Ron plays a Swamp as his land for turn. Ron casts Krav the Unredeemed from his hand. Ron then casts Bone Shredder, targeting Mangara. Jordan uses Domri to make a mana, and then he uses 2 of his lands to put his companion from the companion zone to his hand. Jordan then casts Gigantha the Wellspring. Ryan plays a forest as his land for turn. Ryan then casts Training Grounds. Ryan then tutors for Quicksilver Sliver. Ryan then casts the Quicksilver Sliver on his main phase. Nash plays his Pearl Medallion, followed by a Myriad Landscape. Nash recasts his Commander Mangara. On Ron's upkeep, in response to the Echo trigger on Bone Shredder, he activates Karav and sacrifices Bone Shredder to it in order to get a draw. Ron plays a Swamp as his land for turn. He follows that up with a Vindictive Vampire from hand, and a Yahenni Undying Partisan. Ron then attacks with Krav ad Domri. Jordan starts his turn off by playing a mountain. Jordan plays a Maelstrom Pulse targeting Nash's Deafening Silence. Nash responds by cracking his Scavenging Grounds. Jordan then follows this up with Reborn Hope, returning his Maelstrom Pulse to hand. He then recasts his Maelstrom Pulse targeting the Dranith Magistrate. In response, Ryan searches with his Sliver Overlord for an answer. Unable to find one, he grabs a Dormant Sliver instead. On EOT, Ryan flashes out his Dormant Sliver. Ryan starts things off with a Wild Pair. On his upkeep, Nash activates his Myriad Landscape, searching for 2 basics. Nash starts off by casting a Court Cartographer. Ron starts things off by casting his commander, Shirei, from the command zone. Ron then follows this up with a Phyrexian Reclamation. Ron sacrifices his Soldevi Adonate to Krav the Unredeemed. On EOT, Shirei triggers, returning Soldevi Adonate to Ron's board. Jordan starts things off by casting Niv-Mizzet. Off the ETB trigger, he hits Notion Thief, Fracture, Kasali Pride Mage, Keranos, Leyline Prowler, and Dreadbore. Jordan casts Fracture targeting Wild Pair. Ryan responds by tutoring with his commander, getting Harmonic Sliver to hand. Nash responds to the Wild Pair trigger by turning the Vindictive Vampire into an artifact. With the Wild Pair trigger, Ryan puts Amoeboid Changeling into play. The 2 Harmonic Sliver triggers target Meathook Massacre and Vindictive Vampire, destroying each. Ron responds by activating Krav, sacrificing Soldevi Adonade and the Vindictive Vampire. Jordan attempts to Dreadbore the Hibernation Sliver, but Ryan responds by paying 4 life to bounce both Hibernation Sliver and Amoeboid Changeling to his hand. Nash then casts Swords of Plowshares, targeting Harmonic Sliver. Jordan then passes turn. On EOT, Shirei triggers, returning Soldevi Adonade to his field. On cleanup phase, Jordan discards Leyline Prowler and Karosa. Ryan starts things off with a Forest as land for turn. Ryan then recasts Hibernation Sliver, followed up by a Gale Rider Sliver. Ryan then casts Distant Melody, naming slivers, drawing himself 6 cards. He then casts a Sol Ring, followed up by a Golgari Signet. Ryan moves to end, and on cleanup phase, he discards Jund Panorama and Esper Panorama. On Nash's upkeep, a Myriad triggers, getting him back Dranith Magistrate. Nash starts things off by playing a Plains as his land for turn. He follows this up with a Grand Abolisher. Ryan responds by tutoring with his commander. Ron then responds by activating Krav, sacrificing Soldevi Adonade. Ryan's tutor resolves, getting a mana weft Sliver to hand. Nash then casts Solemn Simulacrum, getting a Plains from his deck. Nash then finishes things off with a Wayfarer Bauble and passes. Onioti Shirei triggers, returning Soldevi Adnade to the field. Ron then responds by activating his Phyrexian Reclamation to put his Vindictive Vampire back into his hand. Ron starts things off with Castle Lothwain as his land for turn. He follows this up with a Big Game Hunter, targeting Sliver Overlord with its ETB. Ryan then responds by bouncing Sliver Overlord by paying 2 life. Ron casts Vindictive Vampire. He then follows this up with a Grey Merchant of Asphodel, dealing 10 damage to each player, eliminating Ryan. Ron activates Kirk, sacrificing Grey Merchant, Soldevi Adnade, and Big Game Hunter. Nash responds by flashing an Alms Collector. Ron attacks Jordan with Kirk. Nash responds by Core Havening Kirk. Onioti Shirei triggers, bringing back both the Soldevi Adnade and the Big Game Hunter. On ETB, Big Game Hunter kills Niv-Mizzet. Jordan starts things off with Eldamri's Call. He follows this up with a Simic Charm, bouncing Shirei, and a Notion Thief. Jordan casts Fire Coven, destroying Vindictive Vampire. Nash starts things off with Throne of the High City as his land for turn. He follows this up with a Limbala, Keeper of Silence, and an Eldrazi Displacer. Nash then declares attacks with Mangara at Ron, who blocks with his Yahenni Undying Partisan. Ron plays a Swamp as his land for turn. He then follows this up with an Expedition map. Ron then casts Viscera Seer and replays his commander Shirei. Ron then plays Grey Merchant of Asphodel, killing Jordan with the ETB trigger. Ron then activates Castle Lothwain to draw a card. On EOT, Nash cracks his Bauble and uses Eldrazi Displacer to flicker his Core Cartographer 3 times, putting 4 lands into play from his deck. Nash starts his turn by cracking Throne of the High City in order to become the Monarch. He proceeds to cast Sword of Sinew and Steel, equipping it to Mangara. He then attacks Ron with Mangara. He destroys Expedition map with the Sword trigger. Ron starts his turn off by casting a Clattering Augur and drawing a card. Ron then casts Grim Tutor, getting Extinction Event from his deck. He plays Extinction Event, naming Even. Nash responds by activating Eldrazi Displacer to flicker Krav the Unredeemed. He then uses the remainder of his colorless mana to flicker his Core Cartographer to get as many basics as he can. He then casts Teferi's Protection, phasing all his permanents out. Ron sacrifices his Grey Merchant of Asphodel to Viscera Seer in order to scry. Ron pays 2 mana into Phyrexian Reclamation in order to return Grey Merchant of Asphodel to his hand. He then casts Sign in Blood, paying 2 life to draw 2 cards. He follows this up by activating Castle Lothwain in order to draw a card. Nash starts things off by playing a Plains for turn. He then follows this up with a Search for Glory, getting an Elesh Norn to hand, which he immediately casts. He then uses Eldrazi Displacer to flicker Yahenni to remove the 1/1 counter, killing it. He then liquid metals the Phyrexian Reclamation, turning it into an artifact. He then swings all in at Ron. On damage, his Sinew and Steel triggers, destroying Phyrexian Reclamation. On Ron's turn, he plays a Smothering Abomination, followed up by a Pitiless Plunderer. Ron plays a High Market as his land for turn. He then activates Castle Lothwain for a draw. He then uses Krav to sack the Pitiless Plunderer for 2 draws, and casts Gary, draining for 5. On EOT, Nash cracks Mindstone for a draw. On Nash's turn, he swings all out at Ron, and then on main phase 2, casts 2 spells from hand, extorting twice to finish Ron off.